Okay, yes, all good. Good afternoon. It's wonderful to see everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcome to this session of the 2024 IISD Trade and Sustainability Hub. This particular session is organised by the New Zealand Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and it's entitled Trade's Contribution to Climate and the Sustainable Development Goals. My name's Alice Tipping. Most of you have seen me constantly throughout the last 2 days, but for those joining us on the live stream, hello again. I'm the Director of Trade and Sustainable Development Work at the IISD. I also happen to be a New Zealander. So as a New Zealander, I think I can say Inga mana, Inga reo, Inga iwi, Inga rangatirata, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, which essentially means kia ora, thank you, which essentially means welcome to all of you. Whatever language you speak, whatever community you may be a member of, whatever country you may come from, in particular for those of you who have come a very, very long way, all the way here to Abu Dhabi, welcome. Welcome to this session, which is about trade and sustainable development, but from a rather different perspective. So the rest of this hub, for those of you who have been here, has been about civil society and academia and the private sector sharing their perspectives on what trade and sustainable development could look like. We've had government voices, but we haven't actually at all had a panel entirely of government voices. So this is a bit of a treat because we're going to hear from the governments negotiating trade and sustainable development agreements why they think they matter and what's in these agreements and what they hope to achieve. So it's a perspective that we've woven in a little bit but never been able to focus on. So I think that's quite exciting. So we have here 4 very senior government representatives from countries, all of which are committed to the connection between trade and sustainable development, and all of which are engaged in 2 very specific initiatives to further this agenda. That's the reform of fossil fuel subsidies and the negotiation of the ACCTS, that's the Agreement on Climate Change, Trade and Sustainability. So just to introduce them, from my left we have Charlotte Frater from New Zealand, His Excellency Ambassador Ronald Saborio Soto from Costa Rica, who I've known for many years, so welcome back. We have Kaja Edren from Norway and Ambassador Markus Schlagenhof from Switzerland. So welcome, thank you all for giving up some of your time to join us and have this conversation. So let me start just by explaining very, very briefly why these 2 initiatives, negotiations that I mentioned are important. So the Agreement on Trade, Climate Change and Sustainability is billed essentially as a very new generation trade agreement, right? And it's an agreement that doesn't focus on some of the very traditional kind of market access for agricultural products issues. What it looks at is 3 key pillars that really matter for trade and sustainability. The first is the removal of tariffs on environmental goods and commitments for the liberalisation of environmental services, the idea being essentially to accelerate access to these goods and services and therefore their uptake. The second pillar is disciplines to help eliminate harmful fossil fuel subsidies, and we'll hear a lot about that as we go along. And the third is the development of guidelines to inform the development and implementation of voluntary eco-labelling programs. And those of you who were in the Fair Trade Association session earlier today will have heard a lot about that. So here's the policy perspective, why this matters for governments and what they're trying to do about it in a collective and cooperative way. I mentioned fossil fuel subsidies. The other thing, which I think those in the room have on your chairs and those online can find quickly on the WTO website, is a statement from the countries involved in the Fossil Fuel Subsidies Reform initiative at the WTO. And I have to confess, when this idea of discussing fossil fuels in the WTO first surfaced, I would have bet money against it ever happening. But it has. And I think the fact that it has found a space and the fact that there are in the statement real tangible commitments to work on that reform in the WTO context is testament to New Zealand's leadership, I have to say, but also to the leadership and vision of all of the countries involved, including, for example, the European Union, very, very large economic bloc who has taken this on along with others. And that statement, you'll see, talks about a number of things. Transparency, among others, using WTO systems to advance it, but also speaking about and analysing the dynamics of very specific kinds of fossil fuel subsidies. So we have their really interesting, very tangible commitments about what countries can use the WTO to do on this topic. So we have a lot of really interesting ideas on the table. I won't talk any longer, but I do have a few questions just for each of the government representatives so that they can give us their perspective of why these things matter to them and what they would like to do next. So I might start with you, Charlotte, if that's okay. Can you give us, from New Zealand's perspective, a bit more background on the ACCTS beyond what people like me can read on a website, and how this relates to the ministerial statement on fossil fuel subsidies? Go ahead.
Tēnā koutou katoa, kei whanganui tara tōku kāinga, kei Manatū Aorere, ahau I Mahiana, ko Charlotte Frater tōku ingoa, nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. So, greetings everyone. I just wanted to introduce myself. I have just told you that I come from Wellington in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and that I work for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. My name is Charlotte Frater. I'm a manager at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and I'm also our chief negotiator for the Agreement on Climate Change, Trade and Sustainability. I also wanted to acknowledge the United Arab Emirates as our host here, as well as Alice Tipping and the IISD for the Sustainability Hub, my fellow panellists, excellencies, colleagues, a wonderful audience, a number of Māori representatives in the audience who I'd like to acknowledge, delegates, colleagues, civil society and friends. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for the question, Alice. In terms of the sort of background to how we got to negotiating the agreement on climate change, trade and sustainability, I think it's important to recognise that for New Zealand, for a long time, we've recognised the importance of trade and sustainability agendas working together, being mutually supportive. I think, as a agricultural exporting nation, perhaps that isn't so surprising that we would see that connection. It's very connected, the environment and trade for us. But I think also, as a country, like all countries, we are affected by climate change, and we see the urgency of that challenge, the need to use all levers, including trade policy, to try and contribute to addressing that challenge. So, taking us back some time ago, in 2009, G20 leaders they committed actually to phase out, rationalise over the medium term inefficient fossil fuel subsidies while providing targeted support for the poorest. In making this commitment, they noted that inefficient fossil fuel subsidies encourage wasteful consumption, reduce our energy security, impede investment in clean energy sources, and undermine efforts to deal with the threat of climate change. Now, when we heard that, New Zealand really thought, wow, this is something we can get behind, this is a great idea. And we worked with a number of other non-G20 economies to form a group, an informal group called the Friends of Fossil Fuel Subsidy Reform, with the idea to help build and help support the political consensus around the addressing fossil fuel subsidies. And that group has been quite active over the years. They meet very frequently. I have colleagues who seem to attend endless evening meetings on this, organising side events, research and development. In 2015, there was a Paris communique on fossil fuel subsidy reform that was presented at the Paris Conference of the Parties in the UNFCCC. So there's been a lot of work done, and that group has also been expanding. Current members include many of my fellow panellists, actually, Costa Rica, Denmark, Ethiopia, Finland, Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland, and Uruguay. So you can see that this concern is not just a concern of New Zealand, it's from a very diverse regional grouping. So this group, the Friends of Fossil Fuel Subsidy Reform, has been active in many fora at APEC and lobbying G20 in the UNFCCC. But in about 2014, I think the Friends realised that we'd been talking in environmental groups about fossil fuel subsidy reform, but we hadn't been thinking about it as a trade and economic issue, which is somewhat surprising when you think of all the work that is done at the WTO to try and address agricultural subsidies, fisheries subsidies. These are trade and economic issues. And so I was lucky enough to be New Zealand's Trade and Environment Delegate around this time. And I was charged by my ambassador with talking to other delegations about fossil fuel subsidy reform. And I have to say that those initial conversations were very difficult. People would say, oh, don't talk to me. You need to talk to my environment colleagues over in UNEP. No, that's my finance ministry. That's definitely not a trade issue. And it was very, very difficult to get people to engage. So in 2017, when we decided to try and do the first ministerial statement on fossil fuel subsidy reform, we had 12 co-sponsors. And we were delighted. That was from hundreds and hundreds of conversations with different delegations, and we got 12, and we thought that was amazing. So I have to say now, when I look at what my successors at the New Zealand permanent mission to the WTO have achieved with the 2024 statement, I'm just really so proud that they have 48 co-sponsors, and the level of detail in terms of the concrete actions that Alice described in terms of transparency, guidance on using fossil fuel subsidies during periods of crisis, as well as how to work to identify the most harmful fossil fuel subsidies. I'm just so proud of this work, and I hope that you will take this away and read it. But of course, this is, trying to lay the foundation for more work at the WTO. And what we'd really like to see from New Zealand's perspective is disciplines on fossil fuel subsidies. But we know that that's a longer-term conversation at the WTO. And one of the things that we're trying to do in the agreement on climate change, trade and sustainability is show a pathway for multilateral action. So as Alice described, there are three key pillars in the Act: liberalisation of environmental goods and services, disciplines to eliminate harmful fossil fuel subsidies, and best practice guidance on eco-labels. And now for those of you who've been around WTO for a while, you'll recognise that some of these topics, especially liberalisation of goods and services, environmental goods and services, is not new. These are things that we've been trying to tackle for some time, but the WTO has not yet delivered. So with my colleagues, we're trying to show how we can chart a path that other countries can join us in the Acts, but also that could inspire progress again in Geneva. So I think I've probably done more than my 5 minutes there.
Beg your pardon, I was just making sure that the ambassador was ready for my next question. But Charlotte, that's really useful, and I have to echo and commend to you all the recommendation to read over the statement, because I think it's a fantastic example of what can be achieved amongst smaller groups of countries within the WTO, and also within these informal environment initiatives that we've seen. And so for those of you who are not as much of a WTO junkie as I am, what's really interesting about the Fossil Fuel Subsidies Initiative is that it is an informal setting where governments at the WTO can talk about an issue. It's not a negotiation, there's no formal mandate from a ministerial. They can define for themselves as they go along what they want the conversation to be about. So there's this initiative on fossil fuel subsidies, there's one on plastics pollution, and then there's a broader one which is about trade and environmental sustainability generally. So for those of you who think that the WTO doesn't respond to environmental concerns, it does. It's just that governments, I think, are using it and learning amongst themselves to use it in different ways, which is quite interesting. Ambassador, my next question to you is about fossil fuel subsidies, perhaps to build on what Charlotte has been saying, because fossil fuel subsidies are just as much an issue, I think, for developing country governments as they are for developed. But I'd be really interested in Costa Rica's perspective, precisely on the reform issue. If you'd like to speak to how it fits into the two initiatives, do please go ahead. But with a focus on the subsidies, that would be great.
Thank you very much. I'd like first to thank the government of New Zealand for hosting this very useful event, as well as the United Arab Emirates and IISD, and you, Alice, who I remember as a New Zealand negotiator with great skills in our previous lives. I'd like to say, regarding your question, that, well, FFSR it's an area where several statements have been delivered all over the world, as you are aware, in different fora to urge the affirmative action to regulate and limit harmful fossil subsidies. This is a commitment that we'll have. The lack of binding disciplines to do that before ACCTS made us move in this initiative. This is actually a work of pathfinders in this negotiation, and a game changer, I would say, that for the very first time will put in place rules to remove distortions that artificially make fossil fuels cheaper to produce and consume. One of the most significant contributions of ACCTS, in our view, is that it will be precisely containing a chapter with binding disciplines that prevents broad, unrestricted use of subsidies to artificially incentivize the production and use of fossil fuels. So the agreement goes from saying to action, which we believe is a very important step, and this with the aim to create a set of commitments that will make production and consumption of fossil fuels face market price that accurately reflect the relative scarcity and opportunity cost of such merchandise. For Costa Rica, it is important to underline that in this agreement that we decided to join, participating countries have demonstrated courage and commitment by engaging constructively in the crafting of a chapter with legally binding disciplines that properly address varying levels of sensitivity across countries. This agreement disciplines on FFS, we believe that show a reasonable balance between the much needed ambitious commitment to reduce subsidies of fossil fuels and following at the same time countries for certain policy space to keep moving forward with their strategies towards decarbonization. Thank you.
That's really interesting, and I can't wait for the agreement to finally be concluded and see how you've managed that balance, in fact, because the balance between disciplining subsidies and allowing governments to have enough policy space to pursue development objectives and industrial policy objectives, that balance has come up again and again and again in this hub. And no doubt at the WTO as well. So it really will be, once it comes out, I think a pathfinding agreement. We'll be as keen to read it as we are to read the statement.
We believe so.
Fantastic. I might jump now perhaps to you, Ambassador, because there's a number of other interesting things in the ACCTS, right? The idea of liberalizing environmental goods, making binding commitments on access to services, and very interestingly, from our institutional perspective as well, the question of how governments can help to shape markets for voluntary eco-labeled products. I have all sorts of questions about how Switzerland's approached this, but we've also covered that before in the hub. Could you tell us a little bit about your approach to this issue from Switzerland's perspective and how the agreement might be helping?
First of all, many thanks for giving us the opportunity to present this very innovative agreement. We are very proud of what we have achieved so far, because I think these are potentially groundbreaking achievements, and I would like to thank New Zealand for having taken the leadership. When we were first presented with the idea of such an agreement, we were thrilled, maybe not just from the very first second, because I first need to convince my minister, but from the second it worked, because we have been active at the WTO in issues related to trade in the environment from the very beginning, from actually the very first day. And there was quite a lot of frustration around how sluggish it was, how difficult it was, and we were seen as preventing developing countries to integrate into international markets, and it was seen as a stumbling block, not as something which could help them. So in the WTO, not much was going on. We were very much engaged in the environmental goods initiative, which was about to see its light in 2016. Very intense discussions, and it, as we all know, it turned sour, like many other market access initiatives at WTO, and like many other things at WTO. But I think this is not the subject. WTO can deliver and has delivered and will continue to deliver, but on these core issues, they were struggling. So I think that the initiative was in as far attractive as it was trying to bring all these relevant issues and discussions out of WTO, and to gather willing countries, as modest a trade coverage of the four of us is, or the five of us is, but it's an important start. And when I look at the CPTPP and look how it started and where it's now, that's maybe also our vision at the end of the day, but Kaja will afterwards talk about accession, accession, and then how to take it further. So the aim is really to develop among like-minded countries an ambitious agreement as a starting point, and to show to the rest of the world we are able to reach high ambitions and deliver. And of course, the environmental goods was an excellent starting point, because we did not start at ground zero, because there was already something there. And even though there was a very good basis, it was not so obvious to really to come up with a list of products with a environmental impact, a proven environmental impact, because this is rather challenging to be credible. And probably when the list is out, you would wonder how this list came about. But we were really trying to be as credible as possible, to cover various areas such as energy efficiency, recycled products, environmental technologies, renewable energies, and so on and so forth. So I think this is kind of stepping into the WTO and continue the groundbreaking work they have done with a view to finish it. And with services, it was a bit different, because there we basically entered uncharted territories, because it never really took off in the WTO. So it was a bit harder to really define it. But you know, if you deliver a good, you also deliver a service which goes with it. So the two belong together. So it was a bit more challenging when it comes to training services. But I think what is on the table, or this will be agreed among ourselves, will be a very important starting point and benchmark for others, and hopefully also others to join. And the last point you referred to is the voluntary eco-labelings. This is something, in particular, our development cooperation in Switzerland is very active promoting this, because we believe that if a label has a proven benefit and it's serious and you can believe in it, then it has a place in the shelf, it has place in the market, it helps, in particular, also developing countries to bring their products to the market. But it needs to be credible. If you buy a product, you turn it around, you see what's in there, where it's produced, what are the ingredients, maybe there are process and production methods, or there's a label. And if the label is well known, you know, I go for that label because it's credible. And I think with these guidelines, we really help to streamline those labels, to have them as least trade restrictive as possible, because it could also have a trade restrictive aspect, and really to promote those labels. And to be sure that we do not need thousands of labels, because then you have the contrary effect. But you need to be assured that when you have a product, then you know. I might dare to do some promotion which is not directly linked to this eco-labeling issue, but we have negotiated an agreement with Indonesia where for the first time ever we introduced a conditionality on sustainability. I somehow had quite some saying in that negotiations. I was AFTA's chief negotiator in this process, and I think it shows that trade and sustainability issues can go hand in hand. And with that product where the conditionality was introduced with regard to palm oil, the private standards played a very important role. We have been very much criticized because RSPO, everyone has an opinion, but we did a benchmarking, and it's the best standard available on the market. And we were testing those products against this benchmark. And I think this is also a very important element to show that labels can play a very important role. I probably also have exhausted. I was not even aware that I have only 5 minutes, but that's how it is. Thank you very much.
Seeing as you convinced your minister to join us in about a second, that was impressive. No, the time has been perfect. And maybe just to round off the discussion on the substance of what the ACCTS covers, just to say from a research organization's perspective, all of these examples are fascinating, right? Because I know that our standards and labeling team have watched the example of the Indonesia EFTA use of private standards very closely. Our energy policy team have been looking at fossil fuel subsidies for years and are very interested to see the commitments that have come out here. So all of this pathfinding, I think, helps us in the research community to understand what is possible, right? Where is the high watermark in terms of policy development, and where can we help governments to go next? So we've covered fossil fuel subsidies, environmental goods and services, eco-labeling. Kaja, I wondered if I could ask you to help us understand, in a sense, sort of what might happen next. The ambassadors referred to accessions, which is tantalizing. But I also have a slightly more difficult question for you, and it's the question of the relationship between plurilateral initiatives, that's initiatives amongst smaller groups of countries, and the multilateral agenda. And this has been a topic that's come up a lot in our discussions in this side event, and it's a topic of much contention in the WTO. Can you help us maybe think through how these sorts of initiatives sit in the context of the multilateral trading system? Go ahead, in 5 minutes, or you can take a few more.
Thank you so much. Thanks to New Zealand. And UAE, and also for IISD to putting these things together. First of all, I think I have to say that we are working very hard on the acts. It's not quite finalized, so we just have to be aware of that. But we are, I hope, very close. And when you say next step and how to go about to have more members on board, I think this is crucial. It's something we would like to see in a very short time. But of course, we also need those new members to share that level of ambition that we have touched upon now, that we have included many new elements and actually not only fossil fuels subsidies, but also environmental goods and services that we have grappled with so many years. So that will be the next step, and we will all be very eager to talk to all interested members, and then see if we can have a larger group, because we all realize that 5 countries cannot make the whole impact on the climate challenge. That is actually where we're coming from. Yeah, we hope to be in contact with other members as soon as possible. And when it comes to the multilateral versus plurilateral, I think we have these discussions going on. And from the Norwegian point of view, it's like if we are having results, or if we are moving on the agenda, we must be open to have plurilateral initiatives, even though, of course, the multilateral will be the best. It is the best, and I think everyone here agree upon that. But just to have some moves, and then we could try to multilateralize initiatives, and that's not only the acts, but I mean we have many others. And what we have been very much aware of in these negotiations is that we don't affect the WTO rules in any case. I mean, we are always having that in mind, and we will not do anything against that. So it's that is one prerequisite for sure. We keep that in mind all the time, and we get that question all the time also. Oh, is this outside, inside? What is the relationship here? And we would insist on it being inside and multilateralized in the future. Yes, that was those 2 questions. But I could comment that I think also what Ambassador Schlagenhof talked about, where we came from. I think it's interesting because it was not that much happening in the WTO, and we were really keen to try to join forces with New Zealand and the others to try to see if it was possible to do something relevant and find a path here. So yeah, we try, and I think we've done quite a lot of work and also getting results, but it was coming from something very frustrating in the WTO after having worked so many years with trade and environment at large, and nothing really materialized. So I think I stop there. Thank you.
No, that's very useful, and I think, you know, it's one thing that I've watched governments do is essentially move their issue forward in various different forums at the same time, depending on what they thought they could achieve. And so it's, I mean, there's a section on fossil fuel subsidies in the SDGs, right? So the idea can be pushed forward in a number of different places. I have one very last question before I open the floor for comments, and it's a question that comes back perhaps to this question of the WTO, right? And the frustration I think many of us felt sitting in negotiating rooms for hours when progress on trade and environment was difficult. It is changing. We have a fisheries subsidies agreement. There are things on the table that I think now really do demonstrate that the trade system knows it needs to respond to environmental imperatives. But is there something else, just thinking of the discussions that are going on across the road, are there other things the WTO could do to contribute precisely to the SDGs or to environment? Is there anything else you'd like to see coming up on the agenda? It's not a mandatory question. If there's something you wanted to put on the table for discussion, you're welcome to, but it's extra credit. Shall I put it that way?
I might just...
Sure, go ahead.
Yes, the good thing is that there are so many more initiatives now than it was like 5-6 years ago. So we welcome that very much. I think everyone here is engaged and try to figure out what is really going on, and if it's possible to kind of move it one step further. So I guess that's what you were alluding to, how to put this into a program of some kind. And from our side, we support that very much, but it is complicated and it takes time to kind of how to get that moving. So that's all. Thank you.
If it takes time amongst a small group, it takes a long time amongst 166 as they are now. Yes, Charlotte, go ahead.
I mean, I think, you know, the WTO in its very opening paragraph of the Marrakesh Agreements talks about sustainable development, and there are many things on the WTO's existing agenda which I think could make a real contribution to the achievement of sustainable development. It'll make nobody surprised to hear New Zealand talk about agricultural subsidy reform. That remains a key objective for New Zealand at the WTO. Likewise, we would like to see the fisheries subsidy agreement brought into force. We would like to see the second half of the fisheries subsidies agreement agreed and brought into force. But I think, you know, those are things that are already on the WTO's agenda that we've been working on for a really long time, and hopefully we can make progress. I think Fish 1 showed us that we can make progress, but there's still more work to do. New Zealand also, I mean, sustainable development is also there are other issues as well. I mean, we're seeing a trade and gender discussion happening at the WTO. We're also seeing, I think, an agenda around the participation of Indigenous peoples in trade. That's something that's really important to New Zealand, to Aotearoa New Zealand, in terms of the conversations that we're having at home, but also that we'd like to see at the WTO, and there's a number of experts in the audience actually who could contribute to that conversation. And more generally also how the WTO, the participation of civil society at the WTO and how that could contribute to sustainable development. I think these are all actions we could take.
Ambassador, you've been working in or within the WTO for a long time. What do you think?
Does it imply anything regarding my age?
We've done it together.
Thank you, Alice. It's difficult to add many points to what has been said.
Yeah.
Well, first thing, we have seen little by little changes in the WTO, but too little by little. If you look, for instance, at the evolution from the legal point of view, from tuna, dolphin case, to shrimp turtle case, and then tires, Brazil, you can see that there is a change. There is a change based on the very first case in which the appellate body admitted that WTO law is not in clinical isolation regarding international law. But we came to the conclusion that we cannot depend on legal interpretations of the appellate body to make things move, and that we have to take action in WTO too. And that's why when looking at these two areas that are so dear to Costa Rica, and of course I'm referring to trade policy, where Costa Rica is believed as a little champion of trade liberalization and its efforts on environmental sustainability, where it is as well a little champion in its efforts to respond to the three environmental crises. We saw the perfect match between the two of them. And we are strong believers that there is a need to work and to push the work in the WTO towards trade really becoming a solution for the global environmental challenges. And then we saw the opportunity with this great agreement that combines common views from a group of both developing countries and developed countries. And I think this group and our agreement is a testimony that it can be done. And Costa Rica as well, I should not be the one saying these things about my country, but we believe that we have made a good effort and a successful effort to demonstrate that actually it is possible to work and achieve important levels of economic sustainability, social sustainability, and environmental sustainability, something that was not accepted by many developing countries some years ago. And we have demonstrated, as a little country as we are, that it is actually possible. And that developing countries cannot continue saying, we're not ready to contribute to environmental sustainability because of the other two areas. And we thought that we should make the effort to contribute to this and demonstrate that. And finally, well, Costa Rica is very committed, as you probably know, in leading to or co-leading with Canada the informal dialogue on trade and environmental sustainability known as TESD. And TESD is an interesting initiative that takes on board different areas related to trade and sustainable development, where we try, now we have managed to convince over 70 countries to join us, including many developing countries, to work together and explore different areas that in the past have not been discussed in the WTO, which has been tremendously successful to exchange practices from different governments in the relationship between the two areas, and also by inviting the stakeholders to participate, which we found that has been a sort of pilot project that we didn't plan, that has been very successful. We hope that this is a pilot project to bring stakeholders to WTO in different areas across the board. Finally, the relationship between trilateral agreements or initiatives and WTO, an issue that has been characterized wrongly, I would say, as a North-South issue. We believe that the investment facilitation agreement that was recently agreed, with over 120 WTO members being part of it, is a demonstration again that many developing countries are of the view that plurilateral agreements are an alternative way to update the rule book of the WTO regarding new issues or contemporary issues. There are different ways to call it. Yeah. Yes, there is a big fight in the other side of the street about even acknowledging, even the expression taking note that they exist. Some members want to hide the sun with one finger. But we think that it's worth the effort to continue convincing as much members as possible. And I think that our work is a contribution to that, that actually plurilateral agreements are nothing to fear, and that members should not address them in an ideological way, opposing them, but take into account what is there for them. And that's the kind of work that Costa Rica tries to do, doing outreach with other developing countries for this initiative and other joint initiatives.
That's fantastic. And let me take that opportunity to thank Costa Rica and Canada and the other leaders of the initiatives precisely for including stakeholders, like my organization, in these discussions, because that does not usually happen in the WTO. I think we all realize this by now. We don't get into those meeting rooms.
It has been in our benefit.
Well, thank you very much. I'm pleased to hear it. But it is a sea change in how governments use the WTO, and one that from our perspective is extremely welcome. So thank you for that leadership. I want to make sure, Ambassador, that you get the chance to have a quick word on the future agenda of the WTO before I open for questions. Go ahead.
I promise it will be quick. I don't
Sure.
know whether I have the crystal ball, and I'm first looking at the crystal ball. I'm looking back. 30 years ago, I wrote my master thesis on trade measures based on process and production methods. Looking back, what happens on the ground? Virtually nothing. I believe the agreement with Indonesia I referred to was the very first agreement introducing such kind of conditionality 25 years after I have written this thesis. What I would like to say, we did too little, too late at the WTO, although we were trying, but nonetheless, what is being done today is nonetheless remarkable compared with what we have done 10 years ago. Thank you.
That is absolutely true. Thank you. Okay, we do have time for, yes, questions and comments. I'll take 2 or 3 and then throw them at the panel. I have, yes, one here, and then a gentleman at the back. Go ahead and let us know who you are, please. Microphone's just here for the live stream. Go ahead.
Phil O'Reilly, I'm from New Zealand, as you can hear from the accent. But the reason I'm here is actually I've been a long-term member and leader of global business communities at the domestic level, Business New Zealand, the plurilateral level, APEC, Business Advisory Council, ASEAN, BAC, and the multilateral level, business at OECD and the International Organisation of Employers. And the reason I tell you all that is that for years and years and years, I sit in rooms that are probably not dissimilar, but smaller than the ones across the road, and come up with business statements, which hopefully help in the green room when ambassadors are negotiating. My own ambassadors tell me they do. Maybe they're just being nice to me. But the reason I raise all that is that oftentimes what I find, particularly at the domestic level, is that if the local business community is fully and loudly supportive of something, it gives governments policy space to move ahead. I remember well, Mr. Ambassador, that when Costa Rica joined the OECD, which is a great day of celebration in my diary, it was made very clear to me by your government that it was your business community was a key issue there, was a key reason why, because they were supportive and loudly supportive of your accession, and I think that's fantastic. So my question to you is this. Well, one of the challenges, of course, over the road is business is also rather excluded from those green room conversations. So the question really is, what have you done in terms of these activities to more actively involve your domestic and plurilateral business communities, including those of governments you target to come on board or you target to change behaviour? Because I just think that's, when I look at government-to-government conversations, I think we rather let governments off the hook because they're not seeing the pressure from either domestic or plurilateral actors, including those with capital, like in the business community, to say, hey, listen, we'd really like you to change course here. So that's the first question. And the second question is, if you haven't done that, how can I help?
Perfectly constructive question. Yes, we have the gentleman at the back with a question. Go ahead.
Hi, Victor Minotti, Demand Climate Justice. We've heard, I'm familiar with some of the ideas of what could be in such an agreement, the subsidies, the environmental goods and services, and I'm just hoping to hear your honest assessment about prospects for anything that might happen this week in terms of a decision or declaration or actual ministerial outcome that might advance any aspects of the agenda here. And then it sounds like it's not such a bright prospect, but I'm wondering then if you could also talk about what are the barriers, what's blocking, and why aren't things advancing? Thanks.
So I think the first question's quite specific. The second one, I think each panelist can probably pick an issue on the environment agenda that they'd like to speak to. But the question about what you've been doing to include your business communities in in the work perhaps under the ACCTS or in the initiatives as they're led at the WTO. I'd be interested in a response from each of you, if that's okay, because your situations and your relationships with your business communities might be quite different, and that would be interesting to hear. Charlotte first, go ahead.
Thanks for the question, Phil. So New Zealand has, I think, changed our practice quite a lot in terms of the consultation we do in our trade policy engagements and the development of our trade policy. So we work with a number of different partners and stakeholders in the development of our positions. So one thing that I know Tanya has been speaking a lot about this week is the sort of privileged mechanisms we have to consult with Māori in terms of our trade policy development. So we have two trade policy groups, Te Taumata and Ngā Toki Whakarururanga, that we talk with, particularly given Māori's status as a partner for the government. So that's something that's relatively new that we're doing, and that allows us not just to engage with Māori, but also the trade aspects, the interests of Māori in that. But we also engage more widely. So in the weeks before coming to Geneva, I've been talking to Business New Zealand, to our unions. I've also been talking to civil society. So we have quite a range of different partners that we talk to. We have a number of sort of peak bodies that we talk to as well. So the Plant Access Council, the core group, as you know, but also individuals reach out and we meet with them and talk with them. So it's kind of, we have specific, I guess, peak bodies that we engage with, but then also we do have a lot of information available on our website and we do periodic consultations. I would say, I think the other part of your question was sort of how we're engaging with other governments, domestic business communities. And, you know, in the 4 years that I've been Chief Negotiator for the Acts, I've given numerous presentations to different international business groups, often through the auspices of the World Economic Forum, who've done a lot of work on environmental goods and services, through the APEC business community as well. I think with your help, I gave a presentation at MC12 to the International Employers Association, is that right? But also I've talked to UNESCAP, to other governments through the, we do regular presentations on the ACTS developments through the Committee on Trade and Environment at the WTO. So we've really been trying to spread our net broadly and to talk as much as possible about this agreement, because we're really proud of it and we're looking forward to be able to sharing it with everyone really soon.
Super, thank you, Charlotte. Ambassador.
Thank you. Well, I think that's a very pertinent question. Precisely, Costa Rica is trying, again, together with some members, including New Zealand, actually, to include within the reform of the WTO a space for interaction between members of the WTO and stakeholders, something that the WTO doesn't have. And that we do it because we practice that in Costa Rica. Costa Rica has a well-developed mechanism of consultations with the civil society, and we receive views from different kind of stakeholders, basically all kind of stakeholders. It is announced, it is public, and we have mechanisms for them to make submissions in writing, to participate in oral hearings, and it has worked very well. On that regards, definition of trade policy, and when we negotiate trade-related agreements or trade agreements, and also in environment agreements. We have a very active environmental conscience in Costa Rica. They are very strong, and we listen to them. And there are three principles that are fundamental for us. One of them is transparency when defining trade or environmental policy. Second is not just being transparent, but taking into account their views and taking on board their needs and views. And third is accountability. And we have very strong system of accountability in Costa Rica. My minister that is responsible for trade negotiations, he's the foreign trade minister, has to report regularly to the respective commissions of the parliament. And when we sign an agreement, it must be reviewed by the Constitutional Court as well. So accountability is important, and I think that Montesquieu would feel very happy about the system in Costa Rica, actually. And we think that that's the kind of work that makes governments can sit down in a table and negotiate on behalf of its citizens and business associations and other groups.
Super.
Thank you.
Transparency, really listening to people, and then accountability for doing so. That's a very good summary. Kaja, go ahead, and then Ambassador. And then we may need to close, I'm afraid. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. So what we do is we have regular consultations with civil society and then the Confederation of Norwegian Enterprises. They also invite us to come and regularly give some updates. So this is a system, and it's taking place several times every year. We also invited the business, all kind of businesses, to propose different environmental goods on the website. Honestly, we didn't get all that many, but I mean, they were invited, definitely. And of course, as a part of the budget and the reporting to the parliament, it's every year we tell about, we give the status of the negotiations on ACCTS and also other trade policy measures. Yeah, so I think that's about it. Thank you.
Ambassador.
Thank you, Michelle. I think like all the others, we also have a very well-established consultation stakeholder management, be it informally or the formally, and the most important is the spontaneous informal one. And this works quite well. I think when it came to defining the scope for the the environmental goods, it was of paramount importance to get the businesses associations involved, because I think without that we could never have gone to that detailed level of understanding what is the impact of these products. What I'm lacking on the other side when we talk about this is when it comes to explaining the benefits of trade to the public. My experience is private sector and companies, they are very often very quiet. And I mean, many of the things you're doing for your business, and when it comes to promote this, then this is very quiet. So this is always my return to business when they kind of complaining, we're not doing enough, but it's a two-way street, and we expect the respective engagement as well from their side. Thank you.
There's a good response. You've all been very discreet and have not answered the question from Climate Justice about what you might expect and what are the prospects for this week. So I'm going to keep you on the hook because I have 5 minutes, 4 minutes, 60 seconds tops. What do you think we can expect from the MC? Prospects for anything? What would you like to see? I'll make that easier. Every government has something it would like to see. What would you like to see coming out of the ministerial this week? Charlotte, 60 seconds.
I mean, we'd like to see results, of course. Yes. Of course, we'd like to see results. And, you know, I think everyone is working really hard to try and achieve that. There's lots of furious meetings going on in rooms big and small. So, yeah, that's what we have our fingers crossed for, is successful outcomes that I think everyone sees themselves reflected in.
Okay. Ambassador, maybe a specific focus on environment.
Yes, thank you. Well, we have been actively engaged in the discussions of the specific paragraph on trade and environment in the ministerial declaration. The negotiations are not over. Not everybody's keen to have a paragraph on trade and environment at all, while all on this table are very supportive of it. I cannot advance results because it's still under negotiation, but we're trying to obtain that. I want to make a point I didn't make before, if you allow me. Okay, yeah. And that is that if you want to have more details about Costa Rica, the process of consultation, the domestic process, or anything else, the chief negotiator of Costa Rica for ACCTS is Mr. Francisco Monge in front of me, and he's the one that has to reflect the interests of our business associations and had to negotiate with all of you the list of commitments and try to defend our own interests. So he's well informed, and he's actually the real expert on the field.
So he's right here for the coffee break. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Kaja, what do you want to see this week?
Thank you so much. I think it's, we all share the view that the fishery agreement should be coming into life. And of course, that outcome document that the ambassador mentioned, I think we are waiting to see that reflected, the trade and environment at large. I guess that's it.
Ambassador?
This is now my 5th ministerial conference in a row. And every time the evening, before the very last day we went to bed, we didn't know what's going to happen the next day. Yeah. And sometimes there were amazing surprises that it worked, and sometimes there were huge disappointments that it did not work. And here again, I think we are in this exactly same dynamic. My guess is that we will go into the last day not really knowing whether the convergence will come about or not, because we know all the pitfalls and the difficult partners in the negotiating room. But the most important would be no rollback. There I'm referring to the e-commerce moratorium. It's not related to the environment. And you mentioned Fish 2. The aim would have been to enter into force of Fish 1. We were the first to ratify.
Well done again.
And that was a bit over-ambitious, but I think Fish 2, that would be an amazing deliverable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have to second the call for finishing the fisheries agreement. But also I think it's really interesting just to hear that not everybody is a big fan of a paragraph acknowledging trade and environment in the outcome document. So that's an important message to take away. Sometimes we can take it for granted that these things should be there and should move ahead, but perspectives are divergent sometimes. Listen, thank you very much, all of you. You've been extremely patient with my rather pointed questions. Thank you for joining us. Thank you very much, New Zealand, for organising this. And for those at the Hub, join us at the closing plenary in half an hour. Thank you.